The pounding on the forge door came like a war drum, 3 heavy strikes that rattled the iron hinges, and Jeremiah Garrison nearly put the hammer through his own thumb before he set it down and crossed the dark workshop with his heart slamming against his ribs. "Open this door, Smith, or I will open it myself." He knew that voice. He had known it for 2 years, had heard it across the market square haggling over ore prices, had heard it laughing low and rare at some joke shared with her kin, had heard it in his own head more nights than he cared to admit, while he sat alone at his workbench with a stick of charcoal in his hand. He threw back the bolt, and there she stood in the guttering torchlight of Stonebridge Crossing, Murak Thunderroar, breathing hard as though she had run the whole way from the clan camps beyond the river, blood not her own smeared along one forearm, her dark eyes wild with something he had never once seen in them before: fear. She wore her fitted warrior's leathers, the ones he had memorized without ever meaning, to a bodice of dark hide reinforced with iron studs that hugged the powerful lines of her body, lace tight up a throat left bare, sleeves cut short to bare her muscled arms, and close-fitting leggings tucked into high boots, a war belt slung low over her hip with an empty scabbard swinging against her thigh. Her black hair was bound in thick braids threaded with beads of hammered iron, and even now, terrified and furious in equal measure, she was the most striking thing he had ever laid eyes on. "Murak," he said her name like a question and a prayer both. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Not mine." She looked down at the blood on her arm as though she had forgotten it was there. "Kagram's, my brother's. Gorek Ironjaw's dogs ambushed our hunting party at the river ford 3 nights past. My brother is dead, Smith. My father took a spear through the hip defending what was left of us, and he cannot stand, let alone fight a claiming duel." Jeremiah's stomach dropped. He had forged blades for the Thunderroar clan for 2 years, had sat across the trading table from old Draven Thunderroar and found him fair and shrewd and, in his gruff way, kind. He had heard whispers of the ambush already, the whole market had, but he had not understood yet how the blade would fall. "A claiming duel," he repeated slowly. "For what?" "For me." Murak's jaw tightened, tusks catching the torchlight. "Gorek Ironjaw means to invoke conquest right. My brother dead, my father crippled, our clan's strength broken on the field. By orc law he may claim the chieftain's daughter in marriage and fold Thunderroar land and iron into his own before the sun rises tomorrow. There is no one left to stand a duel in my place. My father cannot lift a blade. I will not be given to that butcher like a spoil of war." Her voice cracked on the last word, just barely, just enough that he heard the woman beneath the warrior. "I will die on my own sword before I kneel to him." "Then don't kneel." The words left him before he had thought them through. "Come inside. Tell me the rest." She stepped past him into the warm orange gloom of the forge, and even in the middle of catastrophe, he was aware of her the way he was always aware of her, the heat of her passing close enough to raise the hair on his arm, the low, clean smell of leather and river water and iron that seemed to follow her everywhere. He shut the door and barred it and turned to find her staring at him with an expression he could not name. "There is one law that might stop him," she said. "Old Cobb the scribe told my father of it once, years ago, when the conquered was young. Any woman of a clan who is already lawfully bound in marriage under the conquered of the crossing, bound to any freeholder of a market charter, human or orc, cannot be claimed by conquest right. The market's peace outranks clan law here. It has to. That is the whole reason this crossing exists, so neither side can simply take what it wants by the sword." She looked at him then, and something in her gaze made his mouth go dry. "You hold a smith's charter, Jeremiah Garrison." A full charter sealed by the market elder himself. The forge seemed to grow very quiet. Somewhere behind him the coals ticked and settled. "Murak," he said carefully, "what are you asking me?" "I am asking you to marry me. Tonight. Before dawn, before Gorek Ironjaw rides into this market with his warband to collect his prize." She said it flatly, warrior to warrior, as though she were negotiating the price of ore and not the whole shape of both their lives. "I know what I ask. I know it is not, I know men do not marry for reasons like this. But you have never lied to me across a trading table in 2 years, and you have never once looked at me the way the others in this market look at me, like something dangerous to be tolerated. I would rather bind myself to a fair man I trust than be dragged to Murak Ironjaw's tent by the hair. He should have hesitated. Any sensible man would have hesitated, would have thought of the danger, of a rival warband descending on a border market for a bride stolen out from under a clan chieftain's nose, of the prejudice that already simmered under Stonebridge Crossing's fragile peace whenever an orc walked its lanes. But Jeremiah Garrison had spent 2 years sketching this woman's face by candlelight when he should have been sleeping, had memorized the exact angle of her jaw when she laughed, had told himself 100 times that a plain bladesmith with soot under his nails had no business even dreaming of Murak Thunderroar. Here she was asking him to save her life, and every sensible objection in him burned away like frost under morning sun. "All right," he said. "All right, let's go wake up Elias Cobb." Something in her shoulders loosened just slightly, the smallest fraction of the terror bleeding out of her. "You would truly do this?" "I would," he said, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything. They ran through the sleeping lanes of Stonebridge Crossing together, past shuttered trading stalls and the dark hulks of grain wagons, past the old stone well where human and orc alike drew water each morning without looking at one another too long, until they reached the narrow timber house where Elias Cobb, keeper of the Concord and the market's only scribe, slept above his ledgers. It took considerable pounding and one very irritated old man in a nightshirt before they were let inside. But once Elias understood the shape of the trouble, Murak Ironjaw, conquest right, dawn, he moved faster than Jeremiah would have believed a man of 70 winters could move. "The Concord is clear on this," Elias muttered, already dragging out his great binding ledger and a stub of candle. "Written in the founding charter in the section on protected persons. No clan right of any kind supersedes a marriage lawfully witnessed and sealed under this roof. It has never once been tested, mind you, not in 40 years. But the law is the law, and Murak Ironjaw does not sit on the council that can strike it down." He peered at Murak over his spectacles. "You understand, girl, this is not some paper trick you can undo in a month's time when the danger passes. Once sealed, it is sealed. Market law does not grant annulments to spare feelings." "I understand," Murak said, without a flicker of doubt. "And you, Smith?" Jeremiah looked at Murak Thunderroar standing in the candlelight with blood still dried on her arm, and her chin lifted like she dared the whole world to try and take this from her too, and he thought that he would have said yes to this even if there had been no danger at all, even if she had simply walked in one evening and asked him plainly. "I understand," he said. By the time word spread, and a small crowd of blinking, muttering market folk had gathered with torches at the old stone marriage post at the crossing's heart, the same post where trade oaths and treaty oaths were sworn, worn smooth by decades of hands, the eastern sky had gone the color of a bruise, gray edging toward gold. Elias Cobb stood between them with his ledger open, reciting the words of the Concord in his dry old voice, and when he came to the binding, Murak drew a small curved belt knife and without hesitation opened a shallow line across her own palm. "This is how my people seal it," she said quietly, holding her bleeding hand out to him. "Blood to blood, or it means nothing to my father's clan even if it means everything to yours." Jeremiah took the knife from her with a hand that was not quite steady and drew the blade across his own palm, hissing softly at the bite of it, and pressed his hand to hers. Her fingers closed around his, strong enough to ache, and for one suspended moment the whole noisy, frightened, gawking market seemed to fall away, and there was only the warmth of her palm against his and the steady, fierce look in her amber eyes. "With this blood," Elias intoned, "and before the Concord of the crossing, I bind Jeremiah Garrison, smith of this market, and Murak Thunderroar, daughter of Draven Thunderroar, in lawful marriage, protected under treaty from this hour until death parts them. Let no clan right, human law, or blade divide what is sealed here. The gathered crowd did not cheer. A few of the human traders exchanged uneasy glances, and one woman near the back muttered something about disgrace that Jeremiah pretended not to hear, but he found he did not much care. Murak's hand was still locked around his, blood drying between their palms, and when he finally dared to meet her eyes, she was watching him with an expression he could not read at all. Not gratitude exactly, not quite relief, something more complicated and searching, as if she were seeing him for the first time and trying to decide what she had just done. The sun was fully up, spilling gold over the rooftops of Stonebridge Crossing, when the sound of hooves and iron-shod boots announced the arrival of Murak Thunderroar and 24 of his warband, thundering down the north road in a cloud of dust with banners of black and rust-red streaming behind them. The market froze. Stallkeepers snatched their children close. Jeremiah felt Murak's grip on his hand tighten to something bruising as the warband reined in at the edge of the square, and Murak Thunderroar himself swung down from his heavy-boned warhorse, a mountain of an orc with a jaw like a shovel blade and old scars crossing one tusk, his eyes finding Murak instantly across the crowd. "Thunderroar's daughter," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the silent square. "I have come to claim what conquest has earned me. Where is your father hiding that he sends no champion to stand for you? You are too late, Murak." Murak stepped forward, pulling Jeremiah with her rather than leaving him behind, and he understood in that instant that she meant to make this public, meant to make certain there could be no argument later. She lifted their joined hands, the drying blood still visible on both their palms. "I am wed sealed under the concord of this market before the sun rose. Conquest right does not touch a woman already bound in lawful marriage. Ask your own memory of the old treaties if you doubt me, or ask the scribe there, who witnessed it himself." For a long, terrible moment, Murak Thunderroar simply stared, and Jeremiah had the distinct sensation of being a very small, very breakable thing standing in the path of something enormous. Then the big orc's gaze swept over him, soot-stained apron, plain leather boots, hands scarred from years at the forge with open, contemptuous disbelief. "This," Murak said slowly, "this human whelp, this is your husband. He is." Murak did not so much as blink. "And you will address him with the respect owed a lawfully wedded man of this market, or you will answer to me on this ground, treaty or no treaty." Jeremiah's mouth was dry as ash, his heart hammering hard enough that he was certain the whole square could hear it, but he made himself stand up straight beside her, made himself meet Murak Thunderroar's furious stare without looking away, because whatever else was true, he would not let her stand alone in front of this man. "The lady has said her piece," he managed, and was faintly amazed his voice came out steady. "The conquered protects what's sealed here. You're welcome to trade at this market same as always, Murak Thunderroar, but she's not yours to take." Murak's hand drifted to the hilt of the great cleaving sword at his hip, and for one heartbeat Jeremiah was certain the man meant to draw it right there in the square, treaty be damned. Then Elias Cobb's reedy old voice cut through the tension. "Draw steel on this ground, Murak Thunderroar, and you forfeit every trading right your clan holds at this crossing for a generation. The council will see to it personally. Is a bride worth that to you, when there are other brides and other alliances to be had?" The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring, before Murak's hand fell away from his sword. He looked at Murak one last time, something ugly and wounded moving behind his eyes. "This is not finished," he said, low enough that only those closest heard it. "A treaty is only paper, girl. Paper burns." Then he turned, swung back up onto his horse, and led his warband out of the square at a hard trot, leaving a settling haze of dust and a market full of people who did not know quite what they had just witnessed. Murak let out a long, shaking breath, and only then did Jeremiah realize she had never once let go of his hand. The weeks that followed settled into something Jeremiah could only describe as a strange, careful peace. Murak moved her few belongings into the narrow rooms above his forge, a bow, a chest of clan tokens, a single fur cloak that had belonged to her mother. And together they worked out an arrangement that neither of them spoke about too directly, both careful not to presume too much on a marriage that had begun as a shield rather than a courtship. She took the loft room. He kept to the pallet near the workshop hearth, though more than once he woke in the gray hour before dawn to find she had already risen and was standing at the window watching the road, as though some part of her still expected Gorek Ironjaw to come riding back with torches. She was, he discovered quickly, entirely unsuited to sitting idle. Within the first week she had appointed herself his forge hand, hauling ore sacks he would have strained to lift, working the great bellows with an easy rhythmic strength that put his own arms to shame, and watching him work the hammer with an intensity that made the back of his neck prickle. "You waste half your strength on the downswing," she told him one afternoon, arms crossed, watching him shape a plow blade. "You let the hammer fall. You do not drive it. Is that so?" He tried not to smile and mostly failed. "And you know this how exactly?" "I have broken enough bones in my life to understand the difference between a blow that lands and a blow that merely arrives." She stepped up close behind him, close enough that he felt the heat radiating off her, close enough that, when she reached around to correct the angle of his wrist, her braided hair brushed his shoulder, and every thought in his head scattered like startled birds. "There. Now drive it." He drove it. The hammer rang true, and the steel folded exactly where he wanted it, and he was fairly certain his ears had gone red. Trade at the forge fell off sharply at first. A handful of long-standing customers found other smiths to patronize rather than deal with a man who had, in the words of one particularly sour merchant's wife, gone and married himself an orc like it was nothing at all. Jeremiah bore the slights quietly, the way he had borne most things in his life, but it was Murak who could not always let them pass. When old Tam Whitlock made a point of spitting near her boots in the market lane one morning, muttering about disgraced blood, it was Jeremiah who stepped between them first, chin up despite the fact that Tam Whitlock outweighed him by 3 stone, and it was Murak who had to physically hold him back a moment later when Tam shoved him hard enough to knock him into a stall of turnips. "Enough," she said, low and dangerous, planting herself between Jeremiah and the old merchant with a hand flat against Tam's chest that could have broken ribs with a flick of will. "You will not touch him again." Tam Whitlock, wisely, decided he had urgent business elsewhere. Jeremiah picked himself up out of the turnips, cheeks burning with something that was not quite shame, and found Murak studying him with an odd, softened expression. "You did not have to do that," she said. "Stand in front of him. He could have broken your jaw." "Neither did you have to stop him from doing it," Jeremiah pointed out, brushing dirt from his apron. "Seems we're both in the habit of standing in front of trouble for each other now." Something that might almost have been a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "It seems we are." It was in the small hours after that, working late at the forge because sleep would not come, that he first let himself really talk to her. Not the careful, formal exchanges of two strangers bound by necessity, but something closer to truth. She asked him, without preamble, why a man with steady hands and honest work never had a wife before her, and he found himself telling her about growing up an orphan apprenticed to old Tobin Ferris, about years of being the quiet boy at the edge of every gathering, too plain and too poor for the girls in town to look at twice, about how he had made his peace with a solitary life long before she ever walked into his forge 2 years ago trailing the smell of river water and iron. "And then you," he admitted, staring hard at the coals rather than at her, "walked in wanting a blade repaired, and you argued with me for a solid hour about the balance of the tang, and you were right about half of it, and I don't think I've stopped thinking about you since." He heard her go very still beside him. 2 years, she said slowly. 2 years, he agreed, and did not elaborate further, some old instinct for self-preservation keeping the rest of the confession locked behind his teeth. He did not tell her about the journal hidden in the bottom of his tool chest, the one filled with charcoal sketches of her drawn from memory late at night, her stance when she argued a price, the particular tilt of her head when she was amused despite herself, the fierce line of her shoulders when she trained with her spear at the river's edge where she thought no one watched. He had never shown that journal to a living soul. He told himself it was private, harmless, no different than any man keeping a foolish daydream to himself. He did not examine too closely why his chest ached every time he thought of her finding it. Murak, for her part, found herself thinking about him more than she cared to admit. She had married him to survive, had told herself plainly that this was a bargain of steel and treaty and nothing more, but she found she looked forward now to the hours at the forge, to the low rumble of his voice explaining the temper of metal, to the careful, unhurried way he did everything, so unlike the warriors of her clan who moved through the world like a fist looking for something to strike. She noticed the calluses on his hands when he passed her a tool. She noticed the way his eyes tracked her when he thought she was not looking, quick and helpless, before he made himself glance away. She told herself it meant nothing in particular. She was not entirely convincing, even to herself. One evening, weeks into their strange marriage, she found him at the riverbank where she liked to train, having apparently followed the sound of her spear cutting the air. He did not intrude, only sat on a flat stone a respectful distance off and watched, and when she finished, sweating and breathing hard and dropped down onto the grass beside him without quite deciding to, he offered her a water skin without a word. "You do not fear me," she said after drinking, "even when I train like that, even when you have seen what this spear can do to a man." "Should I? Most men do." He considered that, turning the water skin over in his hands. "I've seen you angry," he said finally. "I've seen you frightened that first night, though you'd skin me for saying so. I don't think I've ever once seen you cruel. Strength doesn't scare me, Murak. Only cruelty does, and you haven't got a drop of that in you." He glanced sideways at her, and something in his gaze was so open, so entirely without artifice that her breath caught in her throat. "Besides, I reckon if you ever did decide to run me through, I'd have earned it somehow, and I'd rather die by your hand than live afraid of you." That is a very foolish thing to say to an orc holding a spear. "Probably," he agreed, and did not take it back. She looked at him for a long moment in the fading light, at the plain, honest lines of his face, the soot permanently ground into the creases of his knuckles, the steady patience of him that she had never once, in 2 years of trading blades across his counter, seen falter. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and closed her hand over his where it rested on the grass between them. His breath left him in a rush. "I have known warriors my whole life," she said quietly. "Chieftains, champions, men who could break you in half without trying. I have never once wanted to sit beside any of them the way I want to sit here beside you." Her thumb moved once slowly over his knuckles. "I do not know what to make of that, husband." "Neither do I," he admitted, his voice rough. "But I'm not in any hurry to stop finding out." Neither of them moved to close the last small distance between them that evening, both too uncertain, too newly aware of the ground shifting beneath a marriage that had begun as survival and was quietly, carefully becoming something else. But she did not let go of his hand on the walk back to the forge, and he did not let go of hers, and something unspoken had settled between them that neither was in a hurry to name aloud just yet. The trouble, when it came again, came in whispers first, the way trouble at a border market always did. A trader who dealt in iron mentioned, offhand, that Gorak had been buying up cheap steel and hiring blades from beyond the usual trade roads. A Thunderroar scout, passing through with news from Murak, reported that Gorak's warband had been seen drilling at odd hours, more men than his clan usually kept under arms. Old Elias Cobb, when Jeremiah asked him about it directly, only frowned over his ledgers and said that treaties held only as long as men believed breaking them cost more than they gained, and that Gorak Ironjaw had never struck him as a particularly patient man. Murak's father, Draven Thunderroar, sent word through the same scout that he was recovering slowly from his wound, but that his strength was not what it had been, and that the clan's warriors, while loyal, were fewer than Gorak's. It was not, the message made painfully clear, a clan that could easily weather a direct assault. Murak read the message twice by firelight and then sat very still for a long while, and Jeremiah, watching her, understood without being told that she was afraid not for herself, but for everyone whose safety now rested, however indirectly, on the marriage she had made. "He means to take by force what the treaty denied him," she said finally. "Not just me. The market itself, perhaps, if he believes he can seize enough ground before the human towns to the south can send soldiers to answer for it. A market with no treaty to protect it is just an undefended pile of trade goods, Jeremiah. And he knows this crossing has grown fat and careless, believing its paper walls would hold forever." "Then we make sure they hold," Jeremiah said, though his stomach had gone cold at the thought. They did what they could in the days that followed. Jeremiah worked the forge nearly around the clock, turning out blades and spearheads and reinforced door bars for any market family willing to pay or trade for them, his hands blistering, his eyes burning from smoke and sleeplessness. Murak drilled with the small handful of Thunderroar warriors who had come to the market to trade and stayed to help fortify it, and argued, loudly and at length, with the market council about posting watchmen on the north road. Elias Cobb sent riders south requesting aid from the nearest garrison town, though everyone privately understood such help, even if it came, would arrive too late to matter for whatever happened first. It happened on a night with no moon at all, which Jeremiah would later understand was no accident. He woke to Murak's hand clamped hard over his mouth and her voice, barely a breath, in his ear. "Riders on the north road. No torches. Get up. Get your steel." He was moving before he was fully awake, years of instinct and terror combining into pure animal speed, grabbing the sword he had forged for himself months ago, and had never once expected to need, while Murak snatched up the spear that leaned always by the door, and the curved blade at her hip that had been his wedding gift to her, folded steel, with a grip wrapped to fit her hand exactly. Outside, the market was beginning to stir, dogs barking, a horn sounding somewhere near the north gate. Too late, far too late. They burst from the forge just as the first line of Gorak Ironjaw's warband came pouring into the square, black shapes against the starlight, torches flaring to life all at once in a horrible burst of orange as they set fire to a grain stall to light their work. Screaming erupted across the market. Jeremiah saw a stall keeper he recognized dragged from his bed, saw Elias Cobb's assistant sprinting for the treaty house, with the ledger clutched to his chest like it might somehow shield him. "Back to back," Murak snapped, already moving, and he did not question her, only pressed his spine against hers as the first warrior came at them out of the smoke, and something in him settled despite the terror, because whatever else was uncertain in his life, he trusted this woman with every remaining beat of his heart. The fight that followed was chaos and fire and noise, and Jeremiah would remember it afterward only in flashes. A warrior's axe ringing off his blade hard enough to numb his whole arm. Murak's spear taking a man through the thigh behind him, her voice snarling something in her own tongue that he didn't need translated to understand, was a warning. The heat of the burning grain stall on his face, a moment where he stumbled on a loose cobble and an Ironjaw blade came whistling down at his exposed side, and Murak's spear haft cracked across the attacker's skull a half-second before the blow could land, her body twisting to cover him even as she fought off another man on her other flank. "Stay close," she shouted, dragging him upright by the back of his shirt. "Stay close, and do not you dare die on me tonight, husband." "Wasn't planning on it," he gasped, and found the strength to put his sword through the ribs of the next man who came at them, hands shaking so hard afterward he nearly dropped the blade. It was near the burning grain stall that Gorak Ironjaw himself found them, cutting a path through his own warband and the defending market folk alike with terrible, contemptuous ease, his great cleaving sword already dark with blood that Jeremiah prayed was not anyone he knew. He fixed on Murak instantly, ignoring everyone else in the square. "I told you paper burns," he roared over the chaos. Tonight I finish what conquest began, treaty or no treaty, and there is no husband alive who can stop me taking what is mine by right of blood." "I am not yours," Murak snarled back, already moving to meet him, "and I never was." The duel that followed was the most terrifying thing Jeremiah had ever witnessed. Two enormous warriors trading blows that would have felled a horse, sparks flying where steel met steel in the firelight. He wanted desperately to help her and knew with sick certainty that stepping into that fight would only get him killed and distract her at the worst possible moment. So instead he did the only thing he could think to do. He fought his way toward the burning stall's water trough, hacking down a warrior who tried to stop him, and shoved the heavy trough over with every ounce of strength in his body, sending a wave of water sluicing across the ground directly into Gorak's footing at the exact moment the big orc lunged. Gorak's foot slid on the sudden mud. It was not much, a half-second stumble, a fractional loss of balance, but it was enough. Murak's blade found the gap in his guard and drove deep, and Gorak Ironjaw went down with a roar that cut off into a wet, gurgling silence. The warband, seeing their chieftain fall, broke and scattered into the night, and the market's defenders let up a ragged, exhausted cheer that Jeremiah barely heard over the pounding of his own blood in his ears. He turned, searching for Murak through the smoke, and found her already searching for him, and when their eyes met across the ruined square, something in both of them simply gave way. She crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and hauled him against her so hard the breath left his lungs, one hand fisted in the back of his shirt, her face pressed into his shoulder. "You are hurt," she said, pulling back just enough to check him over with rough, urgent hands, and it was only then he noticed the deep gash along his forearm, blood soaking dark through his sleeve, that he had not felt at all in the chaos of the fight. "You are hurt, and you did not say anything." "Didn't notice," he admitted, swaying slightly now that the fighting had stopped and his body was remembering how much it hurt. Water trough seemed more important at the time. "Fool," she said, but her voice cracked on the word, and she got an arm under him and half carried him back toward the forge through the smoldering wreckage of the market square, snarling at anyone who got too close. And he thought, dizzy with blood loss and something that felt remarkably like happiness despite everything, that he had never in his life felt so entirely and thoroughly cared for. She laid him out on the pallet near the hearth and set about tending his arm with hands that shook, just slightly, despite her obvious skill at binding wounds. She had clearly done this before, for kin, for clan brothers, and her competence did not stop her from cursing under her breath the entire time, in her own language and then in his, at his carelessness, at Gorak Ironjaw, at the whole wretched night. "I need clean cloth," she muttered, and rose to search his tool chest for bandages since the usual store had run out in the chaos, and it was there, digging through the bottom drawer where he kept spare rags and old leather scraps, that her hand closed instead on a small, worn, leather-bound book. Jeremiah, watching through a haze of pain and exhaustion, felt his heart stop dead in his chest. Murak, wait, but she had already opened it. He watched her go very still, her whole body arrested mid-motion, the firelight flickering over the pages as she turned them one after another with a slowness that felt like it lasted 100 years. He knew exactly what she was seeing because he had drawn every single line of it himself. Murak at the trading counter, head tilted in that considering way she had when weighing a blade's worth. Murak at the river's edge, spear raised mid-strike, captured with more care and detail than he had ever given to any commissioned portrait. Murak laughing at something out of frame, a rare unguarded moment he had witnessed from across the square and could not stop himself from trying to hold on to. Page after page after page, dated in his own cramped hand, going back he knew because he could see her counting in her head nearly 2 full years, long before Gorak Ironjaw had ever ridden into the market, long before any treaty or duel or desperate midnight marriage had bound them together. Jeremiah. Her voice, when it finally came, was low and strange, thick with something he could not name. This is dated before we were married, before Gorak, before any of this." "Yes," he said, because there was no point lying now, sitting there bleeding on his own hearth with the truth spread open in her hands. "You have been drawing me for 2 years." She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright in the firelight, too bright. "2 years, Jeremiah, and you never once. Why did you never show me this?" He was quiet for a long moment, gathering the courage he had been avoiding gathering for 2 years, and when he spoke his voice was rough with more than just the pain in his arm. "Because I was afraid," he said simply. "You were the chieftain's daughter, a warrior everyone in this market feared and respected, and I was just the smith with soot under his nails who mended your blades. What was I supposed to say? Here I've been drawing your face at night instead of sleeping. Would you care to marry a man with nothing to offer you but calloused hands and an empty house? I told myself it was harmless, a private thing. I never meant for you to find it. I never meant to burden you with wanting something I had no right to want." No right. She said it like the words tasted wrong in her mouth. She set the journal down with a care that surprised him and knelt beside the pallet, taking his uninjured hand in both of hers. "Jeremiah Garrison, I have been claimed by conquest right, courted for clan alliance, offered as a bride price more times than I can count in my life, and not once, not one single time, has anyone looked at me the way these pages look at me. You did not draw a chieftain's daughter. You did not draw a prize or a treaty or a weapon to be traded. You drew a woman, laughing, training, simply living her life, and you drew her like she was worth looking at for her own sake." Her thumb traced over his knuckles, and her voice dropped lower, rougher. "You have loved me since before I ever knew your name well enough to argue with you over a blade's balance. Tell me that is true." "It's true," he said, and something in his chest that had been clenched tight for 2 years finally let go. "I've loved you since before I had any right to. I married you to save your life because that was the only excuse I'd ever get to have you close, and I told myself I'd be grateful just for that, just for being allowed to stand beside you, even if you never felt anything more than duty toward me in return." Duty. She laughed low and unsteady, and there were tears standing in her eyes now, orc tears, rare and fierce. "I have felt many things toward you these past weeks, husband, and not one of them has been mere duty. I watched you put yourself between me and Tam Whitlock's fists, though he could have broken you in half. I watched you fight tonight with a blade you barely know how to use, back to back with me against a warband, because you would not leave my side even when it would have been wiser to run. A man does not do these things from duty alone." She lifted his hand and pressed it flat against her chest, over the steady, powerful drum of her heart. "I choose you, Jeremiah Garrison, not because a scribe's ledger says I must. Not because it saved my life once. I choose you because in 2 years of watching this market, you are the only man who ever made me feel like more than a weapon or a prize, and I am done pretending I do not want you for my own." He did not trust himself to speak. Instead, he reached up with his good hand and drew her down to him, slowly enough that she could have stopped it 100 times over, and she met him the rest of the way, her mouth finding his with a fierceness that stole what little breath the night's fighting had left him. It was not a gentle kiss. It tasted of smoke and blood and 2 years of carefully buried longing finally breaking free all at once, her hand fisting in his hair, his good arm dragging her closer despite the protest of his wounded one, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his with a low, unsteady laugh. "I ruined your bandaging," she murmured. "Worth it," he said, and meant it entirely. She tended his wound properly after that, though her hands lingered longer than strictly necessary, and she pressed a kiss to his temple when she finished, careful and tender in a way that made his throat go tight. Neither of them spoke of the journal again that night, but she asked, quietly, if she might keep it near her, and he told her it was hers now, had perhaps always been hers, and she held it against her chest like something precious as she finally let exhaustion and relief pull her down into sleep beside him on the narrow pallet, close enough that he could feel her heartbeat slow and even against his side. The days that followed the raid brought a strange new quiet to Stonebridge Crossing, the kind that settles after a storm has finally broken. Gorak Ironjaw's warband, leaderless and scattered, did not return, and word came within the week that the Ironjaw clan's own council had turned on its dead chieftain's kin, unwilling to bear the cost of a broken treaty and a failed raid on a market whose defense had proven far fiercer than expected. A new Ironjaw chieftain, older and considerably more cautious, sent formal word to Elias Cobb apologizing for Gorak's actions and requesting the treaty remain intact, which the council, weary of blood and eager for the iron trade to resume, gratefully accepted. Draven Thunderroar himself came to the market a fortnight later, still favoring his wounded hip but upright and clear-eyed, leaning on a heavy carved staff, to see for himself the man his daughter had married in such desperate haste. He found Jeremiah at the forge, arms still bound in a sling, hammering out a plow blade one-handed with more determination than skill, and watched him for a long moment before speaking. "My daughter tells me you took a water trough to Gorak Ironjaw's feet in the middle of a battle," the old chieftain said finally, "rather than run for safety like any sensible man would have." "Seemed like the thing to do at the time," Jeremiah said, setting down the hammer and trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Draven studied him a moment longer, then let out a short bark of laughter that seemed to surprise even himself. "My daughter has never once in her life chosen the sensible path either. It seems the two of you suit each other rather better than sense would predict." He extended a broad, scarred hand, and Jeremiah, after only a heartbeat's hesitation, clasped it firmly. "You saved her life, Smith, and more than that, you have made her happy, which I confess I did not expect from a marriage born of such desperate circumstance." The Thunderroar clan recognizes this union formally by clan custom as well as your market's paper law. You are kin to us now, Jeremiah Garrison, whatever your blood. It was, Jeremiah would think later, one of the finest things anyone had ever said to him. The town itself took longer to come around, as towns always did, but it came around all the same. The merchants who had once sneered found themselves, in the weeks after the raid, remembering rather vividly which household had helped fortify the market gates, which husband and wife had fought at the burning grain stall to save the whole crossing from being overrun. Trade with the Thunderroar clan flourished in the raid's aftermath, orc iron flowing steady and fair through Jeremiah's forge. And slowly, grudgingly, the whispers changed their shape, until Tam Whitlock himself, red-faced and stammering, came by the forge one afternoon to apologize and order a set of tools, which Murak accepted with a graciousness that clearly cost her some effort and considerable private amusement afterward. Almost a year passed in this manner, seasons turning over the border market in their steady rhythm, and Jeremiah Garrison found himself, more mornings than not, waking to find Murak Thunderroar's arm slung possessively across his chest, and thinking that he had never in his life imagined he could be so entirely, thoroughly happy. The forge had grown, too, in that year, its reputation spreading well beyond Stonebridge Crossing, as word traveled of the blades forged their human steel folded and tempered by Jeremiah's careful hand, but shaped now with knowledge Murak had brought from her own clan smiths, a marriage of two traditions that produced work neither could have made alone. Buyers came from towns 2 days' ride distant for a Garrison Thunderroar blade, as the market had taken to calling them, and Jeremiah found himself, for the first time in his life, prosperous enough to have hired a boy from the town to help with the heavier work, though Murak still insisted on running the bellows herself most days, claiming, with a wicked glint in her eye, that she enjoyed watching him work too much to give up the privilege. On the evening that marked a year since that desperate midnight wedding at the old stone marriage post, Jeremiah found her sitting by the hearth with his journal open on her lap, for it truly was hers now, though he had since filled a second one at her insistence, sketches of them together this time, her hand in his, the two of them at the forge, moments of an ordinary happy life he had once believed entirely beyond his reach. "You are still drawing me," she observed, without looking up, tracing a fingertip over a recent sketch of herself asleep by the fire, hair loose from its braids for once, looking younger and softer than the fierce warrior the market knew. "Can't seem to stop," he admitted, settling beside her, his arm finding its familiar place around her shoulders. "Old habit. A good habit," she said, tilting her face up to his, "so long as you never again keep the pages from me. I mean to see everyone husband from now until the end of my days." "Every single one," he promised, and kissed her slow and warm in the firelight, the old fear of unworthiness finally, fully burned away, replaced by the simple, solid certainty of a woman who had chosen him, not out of desperation, not out of treaty or duty, but freely, fiercely, entirely, and meant to go on choosing him for as long as they both should live. Outside, the border market of Stonebridge Crossing settled into its evening quiet, lanterns glowing gold in shop windows, the last traders calling their farewells across the square, orc and human voices mingling easily now in a peace that had been fought for and won and was, at last, no longer fragile. Inside the forge that had become a true home, Murak Thunderroar rested her head against Jeremiah Garrison's shoulder, his journal held safe between them, and neither of them could imagine, nor did they wish to imagine, any life that did not have the other in it. The claiming that had begun in terror and blood, in a midnight vow spoken over joined bleeding palms to outrun a rival's sword, had become, in the turning of a single hard-won year, the truest thing either of them had ever known, a marriage no longer of necessity but of choice, renewed each ordinary morning in the small, steady ways that mattered most. A hand reaching for another across a workbench, a journal finally shared without fear, a warrior and a smith standing back to back against whatever the world still had to throw at them, certain, now and always, that neither would ever again have to face it alone.